I want to thank the Asfari Institute and the Arab Studies Institute for putting this conference together, and also the co-presenters for their presentations. And I also want to note that my analysis here comes from a collective experience of organizing with the Cornell branch of SJP, and some of the analysis of the mechanisms of backlash draws on a collective report from the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, The Business of Backlash. So to start with an anecdote. After a protest which we organized in 2012, which the Cornell campus police tried and failed to repress, I was talking with an older friend, a professor at Cornell. He was surprised. He said, "That's what we fought for in the 1960s, so you could go and protest without a problem." He was referring to the free speech movement, the battle to open up the university for student speech. And the most famous speech from Mario Savio during the free speech movement in Berkeley, Savio referred to the administration as an autocracy, a firm with a board of directors, before this kind of discourse was common as it is now. So I'm going to describe a short trajectory of organizing from 2012 to 2014. And it starts, as the mood of the student movement then was, with a lot of reaching out from Palestine work to other groups. So we had begun reaching out to the Chicano National Student Group, MECHA, which had recently endorsed BDS on the national level, and to campus feminist and anti-racist groups, post-occupied groups, and Native American student groups. As Israel began to attack Gaza in November 2012, we prepared a protest, which had something like 20 endorsements from a lot of on-campus and also off-campus groups. We set up a Facebook event, and on Friday, before the protest, which was early the next week, received a funny email from the administration saying that they wanted to make sure our protest would go smoothly. Thank you. We ignored that email. In the words of one member of our group, we assumed they were trying to police our protest. The Campus Zionist group, which used to be called CPAC, registered their own counter-protest. We ourselves had not registered our protest. At that time, the campus code, which had been rewritten in the 90s, stated there appears to be no need for a mandatory permit procedure for demonstrations outside. Of course, had there been a mandatory permit procedure, we would very unlikely have asked for a permit anyway. In any case, what happened was that the CPAC student leaders actually admitted that they had procured a permit because they thought it would prevent us from using the space. So as the protest began, we had, basically as the fruit of our organizing efforts, about double the number of people as the Zionists did. And this is at Cornell, so this is, we consider this kind of an achievement. This is not a best place for organizing for Palestine in the country, you can say. So at this point, as we began our protest, a protest monitor, who was actually a dean appointed to regulate students, and a police officer approached me repeatedly as I was carrying a megaphone. So what I did, and what we had agreed to do, was just say into the megaphone, "Police, please stop policing our protest." At this point, according to the chief of campus police, CPAC had the rights to the space, and they asked us to move out. So what they did was, they tried to remove us from the space, started demanding identification from university faculty who were participating in the protest. The Cornell campus police also threatened one person with arrest, which was me. They said, "Put down that megaphone or we'll arrest you." I don't want to be recorded cursing. You're not a student. Okay, well, that wasn't the case. But, and in the process of moving towards me, they threw a female graduate student to the ground who had been between me and police. At this point, we had left the plaza of our own accord, as we had planned to do all along, and went to the administrator's building, where we kept chanting and issued a series of demands. And now a bit of background information. The chief of campus police, who had authorized this repression, had gone to Israel in October 2011 on what was called an Experience Israel training tour in Tel Aviv. According to her, and I'm quoting, "The conference's focus on security of communities tied in nicely with our jobs here of keeping the campus safe from external threats." As she added, "You need to find a balance between academic freedom as well as keeping people safe." And she wasn't joking. This is like, she meant this. The tour is designed by a consulting firm called MK International Security Training, run by a former South African and Israeli army officer. Both. He's got the full spectrum. One of the students on CPAC's executive board in that year, in 2013-2014, was a Camera Campus Fellow. And they would subsequently put on events, including a speaker from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which receives funding from Sheldon Adelson and the Sari Scaife Foundation. I'm going to briefly I'll return in a bit to the implications of those funding streams. So in response to this repression, we consulted very closely with our faculty comrades, including many who had been at the protest. They put forward a resolution through the campus senate to form, and I'm quoting, to form an ad hoc committee to investigate any interference with freedom of expression, academic freedom, and freedom of peaceable assembly. The university, meanwhile, was in parallel carrying out a whitewash, interviewed no student participants, and concluded the campus police officers present stepped into the fray in a well-intentioned attempt to referee what became a very intense verbal confrontation between the pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian groups. The conclusion was that, in short, the university may have diverted some speech, to where we don't know, but it did not suppress speech because of its content, nor act to censor or discipline any participants for expressive activity. The faculty report took several months to write and was based on interviewing about 30 people. Confirmed that there had been a threat of arrest, acknowledged that a student had been knocked to the ground, and affirmed the right of faculty to participate in peaceful demonstrations, that the right to ad hoc assembly for the purpose of free speech and expression without the necessity of filing a notification should be preserved and protected, and there was an explicit charge to event managers and the police should be to protect rights guaranteed in the First Amendment. And those of you who are at universities, which is almost everybody, I think, know that this is, this was found considerable fault with the university. It was a very strong report. At this time, the University Assembly was in parallel trying to go around this other report and was implementing changes in the campus code, knowing that this fault-finding report was coming out soon, and tried to put in a mandatory permit procedure using so many words. And so we mobilized against this again with the faculty, and it was voted down. In turn, we caused such a delay in it that basically it went to the subsequent year. And the University Assembly again considered revisions, and again they tried to ignore the recommendations of the Faculty Senate. Again, we sat in on the proceedings with banners, and eventually there was a revision passed to the campus code, which now states, outdoor picketing, marches, rallies, and other demonstrations generally pose no threat of long-lasting exclusive use of university grounds. No university permit is required for such outdoor activities. And I haven't done a canvass of the campus codes, but at least at private universities, I think this is one of the most progressive in the country. So as we continued building up to divestment, or trying to divest, which we were unfortunately unsuccessful at, we did take over the student assembly and issued a series of demands, one of which was to reverse a bus fare increase. And that was the one which was ultimately granted. And so I want to bring out several points related to this experience of organizing that offer some lessons or at least some reflections. So the first was organizational. We really worked, all the student movements are by now in the US, or almost all student groups are by now doing a lot of organizing with other student groups. And I think this is great that it's kind of become the common sense of Palestine organizing, as it should be. We worked part of it because we were older grad students, but we also worked very closely with the faculty, and this kind of made them more supportive, not just of Palestine, but also of free speech and also of other things. Like, we couldn't have won this victory without the faculty being actively involved. And this really pushed them to kind of get involved in other things. And this was, I think, it was a really good collaborative effort that I think is important to build on. There can be a tendency to look outside the community, especially for legal support or especially for mentoring. And often that support exists in the community you're in. And by reaching out to it, you kind of widen the circle of solidarity. And that was an important lesson we learned. And it was also people who weren't necessarily, who may have in the past been progressive, not on Palestine, because they saw just students fighting for what they thought was right, they joined the work. And were able to open the conversations about Palestine as well. The second point is the tension between law and organizational efforts. And I don't have any large strategic or philosophical claims, but just smaller claims related to our own experience. We all know that law, and as Brenna did the philosophical claims, so I'm just offering some brief things. Obviously law is troublesome because it's a product of power which comes from below and above, and it's a compromise. And it reflects the existing power relations in a sense. So it has a conservative aspect. And conservatism in a moment of reaction is kind of a double-edged sword because it's about stasis, or keeping the world as it is. So in the face of people trying to roll back, to actually be reactionary, to roll things back, the law can be very helpful. And if there's a worldwide revolutionary movement that's putting in place, Benjamin's notion of laws, founding violence, establishing violence, okay, we have a different story, but we're not there yet. We're working on it, I hope. So until then, the law is an extremely powerful legitimating device, especially in the U.S. Even it helps for people, especially students who feel vulnerable or from targeted communities. It helps to know that actions are lawful, and not just at the psychological level, but it also makes the price of protest lower. If something's legal, it becomes much harder, but not impossible, to punish us as students or non-students. So I don't think we can afford, especially at this moment, to ignore the law, and we have every interest in making the law conform to what we want it to be, while we should also keep in mind that the impetus for our protests comes from our own consensus, decision-making processes based on what we think is right. And there may be a mismatch between what is right and what is legal. But at the same time, this is why it was very important for us to change the campus code, which had already been in a certain sense friendly, but to really make it crystal clear that it protected the rights that we thought we had naturally. Another aspect of that is that this change in the campus code was actually a gift which we were able to give to every subsequent protest at Cornell. A legacy to the student activists for Palestine or for other struggles who continue to do the work. And so in this way, we were able to look out from the Palestinian struggle or the BDS work and look to joint struggle by offering something to the broader student movements. Now I just want to make a brief note on the nature of our opposition, which is we have speakers, we have students who are camera fellows who are receiving funding from outside institutions. The Hillel is heavily funded by outside institutions. The speakers that the CPAC is bringing in are funded by Adelson and the Scafee Foundation, in other words, casino money and oil money. And we have right-wing speakers coming in to defend Israel, paid for by that money. We have a revolving door through which the Israeli military security complex, which is actually the child of the US defense industry, trains US police officers to repress political speech. And all of that is justified with that ever malleable discourse of security and safety, which are, of course, the watchwords of repression. And so what we see is that the opposition, through programs, institutions, investments, is weaving a weft of reaction that we need to confront. And as the capstone, the school just built a new wing called Claremont Hall, who's also a heavy funder of Zionist backlash work. So this touches on my concluding point. although we did not, unfortunately, gain a declaration of support for divestment through the Student Assembly, we did gain an important victory in preventing the administration from increasing the bus fees beyond the free speech victory. And the increase in bus fees is basically our aggressive tax on poor students at Cornell. Very often, and it's complicated because Palestine is kind of it's one of the hottest campus flashpoints right now in terms of political work. So it's often the leading edge of campus work, campus political work. I mean, there's a lot of other things going on too, but it's kind of one of the main struggles. But the tension that comes out of that is that often, because that is one of the main struggles, it can often we need support from other students. And sometimes we aren't able to offer them support, especially if they're not fighting a struggle at the same level, or they're just not thinking about campaigns and so forth. So what we were able to do is that we were able to give rather than ask, which kind of builds up a great legacy for future work. And you know, this is not exceptional. There's other groups that come to mind. There's the joint struggle to divest from private prisons at Columbia University, which was also linked to G4S, which we've just, as a movement, just had a huge victory on. And of course, there are others, and I think all of these are beautiful models. And the more we're able to build these struggles jointly, while taking, of course, the BDS call and the particularities of the Palestinian struggle, which demands specialized work, especially in the US or French or Canadian context, I think the more successful we'll be in our work. Thank you.